Well, Trey has put together a treasure trove of information. He's gone back since the BCS era even started, all the way back to when we got away from the pollsters. We told the AP, hey, thanks for your service, but we'd like to play this game out for real. And he's put together what a 12-team playoff would have looked like for each and every one of those seasons, the 5+7 model. Trey, this is some of the most fascinating research that we've put together on our show in the 3 years that we've been doing this. And as the mastermind, as the architect behind this, I'm excited to turn it over to you.
Yeah, man, it was really, really fun to take a trip down memory lane with all this. And this is my favorite possibility of the college football multiverse. I wish that this was our reality. Maybe some other alternate dimension. This is the reality. We skipped the BCS, we skipped the four teamer. But if we did that all the way back to 1998, there's some fascinating things that would have happened. And it left me wondering just what college football would look like today. Would we have this super conference movement? Would we have teams more willing to stay put and be the dominant force in like the Mountain West? So we'll talk about TCU in a little bit as a real winner of all this research. I'll start with last year. You've probably seen this graphic. A lot of people, I had to laugh at ESPN the other day when this broke. I was in the office and we keep ESPN on in the office, and they still had the 6+6 model that they'd probably had, good to go for all of the
For a long
year.
time.
And they were talking about it like, "Oh, this is what it is." And I just laughed at him because like, no, that's literally invalid because of the story that you just talked about. But 5+7 model for all of this, just a quick disclaimer. I did pretend like the Pac-12 didn't exist. So if a team from the Pac-12 was going to get an auto bid, they had to be the champion of their new conference and the highest ranked team of the new conference. I think that makes sense to look back at because we've just never lived in a reality with only four power conferences. And I wanted to kind of keep the spirit of there's going to be four power conference champions and a group of five champion,
Yeah.
even in the years where that wasn't really a thing. So last year, we still get Michigan, Texas, and Alabama in the top four, but Florida State jumps into the top four as an auto bid moving into the quarterfinals because, again, Washington, while they went undefeated, lower ranked than Michigan. So I took Michigan over Washington as the Big Ten's auto bid. They're going to host Liberty. Ole Miss is going to go to Georgia. Penn State's going to go to Ohio State, and Missouri is going to travel to Oregon. I know the first thing that people that are against the playoff will bring up is Trey, that's two rematches, right? That's two games that we saw Penn State at Ohio State. We saw that on the field. Ohio State dominated. We saw Ole Miss at Georgia. Georgia dominated. Okay, cool. Flip Ole Miss and Penn State. That's the beauty of having a committee, right? Like we can just flip those. Then we get Ole Miss at Ohio State, which I think would be a very interesting game with how that Ole Miss Penn State game turned out.
Yep.
And then you get Penn State at Georgia, which I think Georgia wins that one pretty handily last year, but
Yeah.
you never know, right? But that Ole Miss Ohio State game all of a sudden is one of the more interesting games on the whole college football calendar, playing for the right to play Texas in one of the Big Six bowl games.
I love it, man. It's very it's a lot of fun to look at as college football purists that we are. And you go back and look, and I still think it protects the integrity of the game that the
Yeah.
playoff committee shattered last year when they left Florida State out. It gives you wiggle room to avoid matchups, to play with some seeding here and there, but ultimately rewards excellence on the field throughout the regular season in giving conference champions an auto buy, right? Or the top four anyway. And you get to play for your seed in the top 12. You don't win your conference championship. Okay, fine. You're a Georgia. You shouldn't have missed the playoff last year. Let's be honest. Georgia was one of the top four best teams in the country. They would come in as a 6 seed. They're punished for losing that SEC championship game. They do have to play that first round game. Maybe they're playing a Penn State. Maybe they're playing an Ole Miss. It doesn't matter. Point is, any given Saturday, you can line up and lose a football game, and the Alabama Crimson Tide proved that in the SEC championship game. I think it's a very solid model. It's at least amazing food for thought here in the off season. I started clicking through some of these years, and stop me if 2022 or 2021 has your attention, but I was clicking through, and in the COVID season,
The COVID season is insane.
you have some fascinating names in those top 12.
The COVID season is just a fever dream, man. I mean, like the Pac-12 barely played, the Big Ten barely played. It's hard to take a lot of this into account, but just for fun, you get Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma as your top four. So Notre Dame, again, Notre Dame, just pause to talk about them for a second. The way it's set up right now, the best they can do is the 5 seed because
Yeah.
they are not in a conference. They therefore cannot win a conference championship. I guess theoretically in 2020, if they beat Clemson, they're the ACC champions. But again, fever dream season. Don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But Notre Dame, who ended number 4, is going to drop down to 5. They would host Coastal Carolina, who did not get an auto bid. They actually were not, they would have been the 6th conference champion, but they were ranked 12th in the final playoff poll. Indiana at Texas A&M. Okay.
Michael
Iowa
Penix
State.
Jr., baby.
Yeah,
9
Michael
Indiana.
Penix Jr. making his playoff debut at Indiana. Iowa State, Brock Purdy and Brees Hall traveling to face Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney at Florida. And then Georgia and Cincinnati, who actually played in the Peach Bowl, I believe, that year. That game would take place at Nippert Stadium. So how cool would that be to see the Dogs go up to Cincinnati when Cincinnati was still a member of the American?
I just how do you look at this and go, "No, man, I'm good. Give me give me the BCS." You get the integrity of the game is protected here.
The people that don't want this hate fun. I'm just fully convinced that they would rather go back to 1950 where we had like 3 teams on TV and
Yeah.
they just knew what they were going to get every week. This is so fun. Like even if these games turn into blowouts, you could tell me, you could paint a narrative that Brock Purdy and Brees Hall go into the swamp and knock off Florida, right? Like that. And I would say that's the one time they ever would have made it. So how big of a deal is it for that fan base to get a playoff game at Florida and something to rally around? That was their one chance in this 26-year sample size. So why do we want to take that away from a fan base just because they weren't quote unquote like a yearly power, right? Like
Yeah.
let these teams that come up or build for 1 year or rise up for 1 year, let them have their fun. This is about fun at the end of the day, and this is really fun.
I to keep pulling on that thread on the other sideline, imagine if Dan Mullen has a playoff appearance and possibly a playoff win. Who knows if he's still in Florida, right?
It would change, so much of this would change how we view everything. And that's what I'm fascinated about going forward. Going back in time made me realize, okay, coaches that would have made a playoff, right? How far does in this 2021 that we're talking about, how far does Jimbo Fisher go? They beat Indiana at home. Then they get Ohio State that got waxed by Alabama in the championship game and had only played like 6 games that year. Are they in the semifinals playing Trevor Lawrence and Clemson for a spot at a rematch at Alabama? And then what does that do to buy goodwill for Jimbo Fisher going forward? You can write that story for so many different coaches if you go back and play the what if game. What if we had a 12-team playoff?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Dan
just
Mullen, talking about Dan Mullen, he would have taken Mississippi State to the playoff with Dak
true.
Prescott. Does he leave for Florida? Or does he keep building Mississippi State into another power, thinking I can get into the playoff every year here?
Yeah. I the the notion that this somehow hurts college football is so backwards to me. You should still get a one true champion at the end of this, right? Do they have to be the quote best team in college football? No. It's the team that was the hottest at the end of it. They did all the work to get into the playoffs.
And that's
And
okay.
and
Like,
that
there's
is
a whole
okay.
segment of people that don't think that's okay and are really uncomfortable with that idea. You have the right to your opinion, and I have the right to say that I think you're wrong because I just don't get it. I don't
Play it
get.
on the field. We played the games on the field.
Right. And we would rather, it seems to me that that segment would rather think, okay, a 12-0 Ohio State that played through the Big Ten, won all their games, and didn't get a chance to play a 9-3 Ole Miss. That Ole Miss looked really good throughout the year and maybe could exploit some matchups. Well, we're okay with Ohio State never being tested in that way, just to say that we had an undefeated champion. Like that just doesn't make sense to me,
Yeah.
and it
And
never will.
And listen, I know if you're a an anti-expansionist, if you're one of those people that wants to go back to the BCS, I know it sounds like an echo chamber here. So write us in at 3Tech Pod on Twitter, on Instagram. You can leave a comment in the YouTube section. I would love to hear from you and continue to hear from you, because those discussions that I have had with fans, with other folks that I've worked with in the industry of college sports, it gets to a point where I feel like they run out of ammunition, and I feel like there's really no other answer. Their pros list is so much shorter than mine. But again, personal preference. Maybe that's an anecdotal example. So right into the show. We'd love to hear from you. Um, 2018 is interesting because UCF has hung a banner that they're a national champion. Right after going undefeated, they would be the 8th seed in the 2018 year. They would host a 10-3 Washington squad, and if they won that, they would get a date with the top team in the land and the Alabama Crimson Tide. Suddenly, Trey, hanging a fictitious banner seems a lot less doable if you're actually getting to put the Dukes up against Nick Saban.
And not to dunk on our friends that are anti-expansion again, but I feel like the Venn diagram of people that are anti-expansion and were extra annoyed by UCF putting up that banner is a circle. I think it's just all the same people. And so why are you against them getting their teeth kicked in by Alabama? Let them prove it, right? Are we scared that UCF is going to beat Alabama? Like, I don't know. Like, let's just let that happen on the field.
Yeah. Other notable teams that I found when I was clicking through this: Western Michigan makes it in 2016. They went 13-0. Colorado makes it that same year. They're 1 year of success since the early 2000s, right? They go 10-3. They would have been a 10 seed against a Michigan Wolverines squad. And then going back to 2014, the first year that we had the college football playoff, TCU and Baylor famously get the bird from the playoff committee. They both get left out when I think everybody universally agreed one of them should have been in. Baylor would have been the 4 seed in this universe, taking on the winner of Ohio State and Boise State. TCU would have been the 6 seed, having to play in your model a 9-3 Kansas State squad.
Yeah, and it would have been a rematch. So again, if you don't like rematches, switch TCU with Arizona, who again, Arizona would have been in the
Hello.
playoff that year. Hello. And as well as both Mississippi schools, Mississippi State and Ole Miss. 2014 was a wild time, man. That feels like so
Oh,
much longer than 10 years ago.
unreal.
But again, that was also a year that Oregon jumped in and stole the Big Ten's auto bid. So that's why Ohio State's not in the top four. I have them as the 5 seed. Again, pretending like the Pac 12 didn't exist and using the Pac 12's new conferences. Oregon was ranked higher, so they get the Big Ten's auto bid. Ohio State's consolation prize, which interesting enough to me, is that 5 seed. I know you have to play an extra game. Is the 5 seed desirable if you're not going to be 1 or 2? Would you prefer to be 5?
Boy,
Because you get to finish my thought on Ohio State, they get a like I'm not going to say it's a 0% chance. They would play Boise State more often than not. If you're that 5 seed, you're going to get a home game against the G5's national champion, right? So probably the 20 to 25 ranked team, maybe 15 if it's a really good season for that G5 team. I like you get that home game and then you're playing the 4 seed that more often than not was a conference champion that leapfrogged into the top 4. So you're not even playing a true top 4 team most of the
True.
time. And you're getting an extra week to work out the kinks almost. Like that you're not going to be as rusty as that 4 seed. I don't know, like if I'm not going to be the top seed, I kind of like that 5 spot.
That's a fascinating question. I think especially about getting the rust off, quote unquote. Now it's different than it is in baseball, but again, going back to the MLB, there's actually a movement to get rid of the first round bye, that division, or the what is it, the top, is it the top two
Top 2 division.
records, yeah,
Yeah.
in the AL and NL get, because you're starting to see a trend of those top 2 seeds going down in the ALDS. And the argument is they've sat around for a week. The bats get cold, the pitchers lose their rhythm, and meanwhile you've got the Rangers and the Diamondbacks who had to fight for just their survival getting into the playoffs. They take that momentum into a wild card series. They get right. The Rangers bats got hot. The Diamondbacks were striking everybody out left and right. And suddenly you go into an ALDS or an NLDS with momentum on the side of the lower seed. I think that's a fascinating point for the 5 seed, that maybe if you don't get that first round bye, it might be an absolute dogfight to be the fifth best team in the country, which how ironic is that?
And for all the people that say that regular season doesn't matter, it will matter to be in 5 versus 6 is going to be a big difference, and 6 versus 7 is going to be a big difference because the drop off, I think, in the matchup between facing number 2 and facing number 3 or 4, I think is going to be huge most years, especially in the years where there's multiple teams in the top 4 that don't win their conference. And the top 4 of the rankings going into conference championship week. Conference championship week is going to be the most fascinating week every single year. It's going to be like the conference tournaments in basketball where there's bid thieves and
Yes.
teams sneaking in. And I can't wait for that aspect of this.
Yeah, imagine an 8-4 Iowa somehow knocks off Michigan, right? And suddenly they're in. They're the Big Ten
Right.
champ, baby.
They're sneaking in as the 12 seed and knocking somebody else out.
Yeah. So, anyway, just a fascinating theoretical discussion there.
Gracious, how about